And
Okay.
is yours recording too?
I pressed the button.
Mine says recording in the upper left-hand corner.
I honestly think it's only going to let one person record at a time, and that's going to be whoever
Mine
hit it
says
first.
I can do record on this computer or record to the cloud. Yours is probably going to the cloud, right?
I don't know. Like I said, I've never recorded it when someone else has been
Recording.
This meeting is
Mine-
being recorded. Okay, hold on. Now it's saying the account owner can watch. Okay. So is yours say recording now in the corner?
Mine does say recording, yeah.
Okay, so we're both recording.
Okay. All right.
Hey.
Okay, so shall we start the meeting?
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and launch right into this discussion.
We got to do introductions first.
Oh, but I will.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
It's all in my formatting.
Let's go, facilitator.
Yeah, all right. So I will be facilitating this discussion on child and adolescent language intervention. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for your participation. My name is Joe. I am your facilitator. I wanted each of you to please introduce yourself. Now, I understand that some of us here do have experience with professional work in child language intervention and education. To be completely transparent, I do not. I think I'm the only one here who does not work in education. So if you would all mind, please introducing yourselves and say exactly what you do in your experience in the topic. That way we can get a better perspective on where to move forward with the conversation. Sam, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Sammy Rupert. I'll be the timekeeper for this discussion. So for my experience, I graduated last December, so last semester, the spring semester that I had off, I was a kindergarten aide in a classroom, and they were fantastic and lovely. Kindergartners are great. And then this fall, I just started a new job as an ESL tutor for elementary students at 2 different schools. So that's kind of where my experience is right now.
Very nice. Colby?
Awesome. So right after undergraduate studies at USF, I started as an autism teacher for a 3rd through 5th grade unit at an elementary school. And I did that for a year and a half and transitioned right into speech language pathology as an assistant. So I have been with my local school board for this month actually makes 7 years as an SLPA. So I'm so glad to be finally admitted into the program and going forward with the career. But primarily I work with elementary schools. So my specialty right now in my heart is with pre-K to 5th grade, but I have worked with middle school students as well in speech and language.
Wonderful. Matt?
Well, congratulations, Kobe. 7 years. It's a long time.
It is a long time.
Not in a bad way, in a good way. I'm also an SLPA. I've been an SLPA for about 2 years. I worked at a school in Florida. I worked at 2 schools in Florida. One was mostly early like 3 to 5, and then the other school was high school. So I worked in high school, and then for the last about year and a half, I've worked at a clinic, and I work mostly birth to 3, and I have a few clients that are 18, and I have a couple clients here and there that are kind of run the gambit, but mostly early intervention, birth to 3. Oh, and I also have a daughter, so she's
All right, lots of experience there, I'm sure. All right, guys. Well, moving on with our conversation, I just want to say that I do teach accent modification or accent reduction, and that's kind of like where I get my experience from an articulation standpoint. But like I said, I have not worked in education, so a lot of the experiences I'm going to be asking about will be drawing upon your experiences with any of the questions that have specifically to do around vocational experience in speech and language or educational experience. I'll be quite interested to see what you say. So one of our first projects for this class was the personal projects centered around the ICF the personal projects was one in which we wrote down goals for the projects for the semester. We were asked to categorize those goals into either professional goals, academic goals, personal goals, and we were asked to classify those goals around prioritization as well. For example, as a graduate student in communication science and disorders, that might be your number one priority, but then you were also asked about different things as far as like moving on with your career, as far as personal relationships, as far as participation in activities. And I personally found that activity to be more helpful than I expected. I wanted to get your guys' perspective on that. So if you would discuss the concept of personal projects and well-being in the context of the ICF, consider the culture and influence and lived experience. And if you want to go one by one, and then we'll start a conversation. If you want to start, Sammy.
Yeah, so kind of, are we saying more like right now, starting with like how we felt about it when we were filling out our
It could be
personal
anything.
project? Anything?
Anything.
Yeah, so I guess I found it more helpful than I originally thought it would be too. It made me kind of realize that I was neglecting some areas of like well-being in my own life that I hadn't realized before. Especially just with the timing of things, because at the time I had just moved here to North Carolina. I was from Eau Claire, so I had been around like my family, my friends that I've had my entire life. And I came here somewhere new. I didn't know anyone except for my husband. But 2 weeks into being here, he was in Sweden for training. So I was here, I didn't have a job, I didn't have really, I hadn't had time to make friends yet at that point. And it was just like, I realized I was just kind of neglecting different needs that I had. And it kind of helped me realize like kind of needed to get out of the funk I was kind of in with that. I also kind of thought about how something like this could be beneficial when working like with different clients. I definitely don't think would ever do something like as involved as that was. That's a lot of steps, very like kind of intensive, like kind of referencing different things. But I think it could be like an important way to like check in with your clients, kind of like make sure you're prioritizing like, you know, both the child and maybe their family's goals just for like daily life, getting a sense of what's meaningful for them and like kind of helping use that to like prioritize what kind of intervention you're doing, what kind of goals like end up setting. I kind of would, I feel like this is kind of more connected to aphasia, but I feel like some of those things that we mentioned in aphasia could be, you know, scaled down for more of like a child or language type of way where they said like, you know, you have the different pictures of like activities, like what activities like would you like to do more, like what's difficult or not. I feel like that's one way that this could be worked into intervention and just kind of get a better sense of that with everyone. So that was kind of my initial thoughts on it.
I love what you said about the aphasia class and tying in participation and the importance of participation to overall all life well-being. I think we're going to find as we move forward in graduate school that there will be a lot of interconnectedness to this. So even though this isn't aphasia class, I love how you brought that up because I also noticed the same thing. Colby, do you want to speak on the ICF and the participation project?
Absolutely. So I'm going to put a pin in your comment, Sammy, about aphasia. It's gonna make full sense in a second. But the personal project for me, I think it was just really eye-opening because I think a lot of times we just in our personal lives make these goals and we have things we want to do and we just get so caught up in like everyday like routine and you say, oh, I want to do this, or I want to do that, or I need to do this and need to do that. So the project really helped me like prioritize and just figure out all the things that I have going on and really scale it down to like what is number one priority and then how can I connect some of these desires and goals into other parts of my life. You know, how can I just incorporate everything together? Um and so just to talk about aphasia, so in July and August, my mom had two strokes
Oh,
back to back. And so she is doing really well now. But of course, that was like a really huge shock. And it was right before we started this class. And so I have been using a lot of what we are learning here and in our aphasia class, like to help with aspects of like just personal life and going through that with her. But this is one of the I kind of tweaked it and did my own little thing with it, but I used this personal project to help my mom because she is experiencing aphasia, but like just to figure out what it is that she wanted to accomplish first in her recovery process. You would be so surprised how just like I said, I tailored it to her, but it helped her in such a major way. Like communication, we know is such a huge aspect of our life, but when when you're having trouble communicating, like everything changes. And so we learn about it in class, right, without ever maybe having experienced it. But that experience in my house, like right there with my mom, and knowing like she wants to say something but it's not coming out, this particular personal goal in reference to aphasia, it really helped her because I was able to help her like figure out, okay, what are we going to work on first with her SLP? This is important to her, just for daily life, daily communication with her family, with her friends, like outside ordering Starbucks, which is her preferred drink. She wasn't able to do those things. So we started with scented strips. We did like Velcro with the picture, all of those things in the window at Starbucks. Like, but it started from something like our personal project, like what is important first in your life, in reference to your journey to being able to communicate again. So it hit differently. And in the beginning, I didn't see what I was like, oh, I don't know the purpose of this. But now at the end of the course, I see full circle that this is very useful. It does take a lot of work, but it's a major step when you have a client who is struggling in a certain part of their life, whether it's communication or whatever it is, incorporating the family, incorporating them, and just helping them shape and define the goals, you know, pertaining to them in their communication. It's major. So I
Wow.
appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing. So
Yeah.
sorry to hear about your mom, but it sounds like you're able to see a silver lining somewhere in there.
Oh,
And I hope
yes.
it continues to recover.
Thank you.
Matt, did you want to speak on your ICF personal project?
Yes, and thank you, Sammy, for sharing. Toby, my thoughts and prayers with you and your family, of course. She couldn't have obviously a better person to help her through this. So,
Thanks.
uh, so like you said, and like Sammy, you said, just kind of like taking a perspective on this in a way that's like, when we start grad school, it's so easy to just see the whole big picture and just get lost in it all. So to have it in little bits and pieces and kind of let you break it down and be like, okay, here it is, it kind of makes it more digestible. And as far as like applying this to the WHO ICF, I guess I just want to talk about that a little bit. So first, I just want to like really quickly define like what the WHO ICF is. It's the International Classification of Disability, or Functioning Disability and Health, and it goes beyond like the traditional focus of like disabilities, and it takes like a more holistic view, which is like super helpful, especially in speech, because we're in such a unique position where we kind of go past the point of like just the disability, and there's so many layers to what we're dealing with. So I guess I'll talk about something that like here's an example. The number one thing on my goal was to be a good father and husband. And if I were to break that down with the WHO ICF, I'd have to look at like body function. So I'd have to have my body function has to be, tip top shape. I have to be able to get down on the ground, play. Even as an SLP, I need to be able to move around, do my thing. Body structures, I need to have, I have to be able to stand up, sit down, involves like even like being a parent is very physical and taxing, obviously. So that's part of it. Activities and participation. So being able to participate in raising my daughter, going to the park, celebrating Christmas, stuff like that. Activities and participation. So also contextual factors. So my home environment, is it a safe place? Is it a place that I can like foster learning for my daughter, stuff like that. So the way the WHO ICF broke it down is kind of similar in the way that this project broke down our lives. So just kind of individualized to ourselves. I feel like that was a really good way to kind of like make those two come together. And also just in general, the WHO ICF is just a great way to kind of get in the headspace of our clients. Therapy is such like it's such an overwhelming experience, be it aphasia, if you're doing swallow, artic, doesn't matter. It's a huge process, and it's a lot to kind of take in. So I think it's important that we are able to take a step back, and I feel like that ICF gives us that perspective and gives us that at least a jumping off point to kind of give for us. Joe, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much. Yeah, I love how the ICF really places an emphasis on holistic health rather than just what you would think of as like medical health, but it includes mental health, social health, and this idea around functioning and disability, and those with disabilities have the same opportunities to lead fulfilling lives that those without disabilities do. There just has to be accommodations there. And, for me, writing down the list of things that I wanted to do and prioritizing them was helpful. And it actually made me feel like a procrastinator, but having them written down made it there like a glaring reminder that I have these things I need to do. For me was writing my resume, because I don't have an SLP resume like y'all do. If you're an SLP, yeah, you have one. I don't have one. I just go to graduate school for it. So I had to write that and apply for externships, which I was putting off. I finally have done that, and I'm on the way to completing that process. And so in the end, I didn't think it was a valuable experience. And I wanted to thank you all so much for your contributions to that. But I think at this point, we will move on to prompt number 1. So, prompt number 1. Explore participants' thoughts on the most interesting or helpful concepts, ideas, or topics learned in this course. Now, we don't have to spend 20 minutes on this because we have 3 topics to go through instead of 2. So if we're a little short, that's fine. If we go over, that's fine too. We can skip the last prompt. So this is just, I'm asking you guys, what were the most interesting things you learned about in this course? Could be about, interventions and particular specific interventions, could be about different cognitive processes you learned about, anything you'd like to discuss. Sammy, would you like to begin?
Yeah, so something that honestly stuck with me, it was a very short video just thrown in kind of like midterm week, I want to say. It wasn't like the focus of an entire like module or anything, but the 30 million words initiative video was something that I found that super interesting. I wrote down a couple of like the statistics because I wanted to make sure I got them right. But just like the idea that like children born into poverty hear like 30 million fewer words compared to a child born into more affluent circumstances. I didn't realize like there was even a possibility for like such a large gap. Like 30 million, that's an insane number. I couldn't even visualize that, I guess. But and just like the way that impacts kind of their future, because like that could impact like them going into school, their later like just the way they approach academics and different things which could like impact like their future career. You just don't know. So things like that. But after like going through the course then a little bit, it was interesting to learn. It seemed really similar to like a lot of the interventions we were learning too, because I think this was in Chicago, but they would like teach the parents these different like skills or different things they could work on with their kids to try and like really like empower them to use like language and learn more words in other ways that they wouldn't have. And it just kind of like reminded me more of like more of those early childhood interventions that I think we learned more about like in the early presentations that we personally did, not more the school age ones that we did later. But like they had the opportunity to like educate the parents. They got feedback when they put it into like practice. So I just think like contemplating on that was like probably pretty important. Honestly, I was like on a phone call with my grandma and I was telling her about this because she was just asking what I was learning about in school, and I just found it so interesting. But she was telling me she's in the Lions Club for where she's from. It's Altoona, Wisconsin, just like a couple minutes outside of Eau Claire, very close. But when I told her about how like 30 million less words, like she was like, that's really crazy. But so she's in the Lions Club through Altoona, and she was talking about how their Lions Club was working on like their own kind of initiative. So they have a couple laundromats in town, and they started collaborating with the library to bring in books in like the Hmong and like Spanish languages, so that families who might have to like more predominantly go to these places have access to like books, and they have the opportunity to like take them home. If that's not an option, they get somewhere else. And I just thought that connection was kind of cool, because it's like a way to expose kids to language that were like they might not have in their circumstances otherwise. So that those kind of connections were just something I found really interesting as we were going through the course. But yeah.
I mean, how could you overrate language exposure for learning language, right? That
Yeah.
30 million words, I hadn't thought about that for a while, but that one had a huge impact on me early in our semester. That was shocking for me to hear. And I don't know how they got that statistic or how it was
Yeah.
substantiated. I'm not quite certain about that, but regardless, it does show that it's so important to be exposed to language, to learn language.
For sure.
Any other comments on that one?
I'll make a quick comment. So, as stated before, I do work in the school board, and I think a lot of the times when I am listening at meetings and working with the teams, interventions is always something that everybody is like scrambling around. And I'm not quite sure, I haven't put my finger yet on what the disconnect is between like speech and language interventions, interventions with reading, like just those types of interventions when it comes down to children who are scoring or testing low for a program. And so our like chapter, I think we started the interventions directly like in chapter 3, where just kind of talk to us about like the purpose of interventions. And so some of those like the clinician approach, the drill, I was able to relate to a little bit of those, like drill. That was like one of the top things that I learned in mirroring and like kind of shadowing some of the SOPs that I started with. It's like super big in the school system where I work, drill, like drilling, drilling certain sounds like in the drill play. But just kind of focusing in on like the clinician approach, the child-centered approach, all of those are really enlightening because again, like that is something that is so prominent in the field that we're in, but more specifically when you're working with children of a certain age, especially like first grade to like fourth grade, I see that these interventions are, I'll just say I took a lot of them back and asked a lot of questions to the people that I work with. One, I just feel like some of the educators like are not as exposed to the interventions that SLPs or SLPAs would be in this course. And so there's a disconnect there. And so that was really enlightening. It was really enlightening and helpful.
So you would say that general educators are less educated on language interventions than SLPs, which would seem obvious, but also
Right.
you would think that they would want to have like a general knowledge of language interventions, especially English teachers or elementary school teachers who are teaching English or reading and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I think that it comes from there's a leadership board here. So you may have someone like me or you coming in and we're right out of grad school. So we have this knowledge, or you have an SLP who has been an SLP for 30 years. And so a lot of the times when you're in those settings, some people are not as open to receiving that information. And it's almost like, oh, we have to go up the chain of command to see if this is, if this is something that we can utilize. And it's like, I see in my school board, just from the schools that I've worked with, which is like probably 90% of the elementary schools I have made my way around, there's just one base of interventions that the county can use when there's so many more that we should be able to tap into, because one intervention may not work for every student. And so I see that they're trying to put one intervention or one strategy and use that for every child or use that for the mass population, and it just doesn't work. And then you see that there's like an inconsistency in scores, or there's an inconsistency in levels, and I just feel like it's because the baseline we're using one base of interventions across the board, and it doesn't work that way.
Well, thank you so much. Is that all you had to say right now for prompt number 1, Colby?
I'll add to what Kobe was saying, and this kind of just goes off of, well, we're both assistants, so I always, when I started this program, I thought like this class particularly, I was like, well, this is going to apply directly to everything I'm doing right now. So I thought to myself, well, what is going to be the big leap from when I'm an assistant to a SLP, like a full-fledged SLP? And I feel like, Kobe, going off of what you were saying, like the freedom of just like, I can write these goals. I'm kind of in control here. I don't have the hierarchy, like you said, to go up this ladder. And that is like, it's such a wonderful gift, but it's also, daunting in the same way. And I remember it was in chapter 3. It said like, what is being treated is more important than how it is taught. And that kind of stuck with me. And I was like, okay, so I kind of, because if you're treating the wrong thing, the thing that needs to be treated is not being treated. So it doesn't matter how well you treat the wrong thing, it's still in the wrong direction. So making sure that you're targeting the right goals. So I guess like the most interesting thing that I found was like the zone of proximal development. And I work with 6 other SLPs, and I'm like the freshest in grad school. Obviously, I'm in grad school. So when I'm like throwing out like the zone of proximal development, like I have ears on me for the first time ever. And I'm talking about the zone of proximal development, and they're like, oh, well, where should I shoot for this? And how should it go? And I feel like maybe even that is undersold in our field, just knowing where to begin, because it is so much freedom. So there needs to be that, okay, I have the freedom to choose these goals for these children and not operate within this box, but where does the box exist? Is there a box? Where do I start? And I feel like there really shouldn't be. It should be individualized to each child, but I guess just like keeping that in mind, and it's nothing you're going to forget, because we're going to be so busy when we graduate. It's just we're going to be drowning. So keeping that in the back of our mind is that are we teaching the right thing for this child? So that's been very helpful for me.
Thank you, Matt. I love that. I'd forgotten that as well. What is being treated is more important than how it's being treated. I love that, because if you're off topic with what you're treating, how can the method possibly be right? It can't be. I love that. So I did looking at this particular prompt for myself. I wanted to discuss the topic of working memory and how it is vital to SLPs in understanding working memory. We watched a screencast, and I think we took a brief quiz on working memory, and that video really helped me to understand better what working memory is, because it's a word we use all the time in every class we have in speech language pathology, but it helped me to better define in my mind what working memory is, the ability to hold bits of information to work on a problem. And I really appreciated how that particular video shared how auditory processing can influence working memory, and how we store working memory as auditory bits rather than visual bits. And it gave the example of how sequences of letters are easier to remember if they sound different, but words are easy to remember even if they look the same, if they sound different. And so it made me think about, what about children who are deaf or hard of hearing? How is that going to affect their working memory? Now, of course, they're going to have cognitive visual compensations, which is natural for anyone who has a sensory deficit. But I did find it really interesting to think about how, like, the average person in working memory is so much an auditory process. It's like you hear it in your mind, and that's how your working memory works. So that, for me, was one of the most informative bits that we had in our class that I can see applying to all parts of speech language pathology across the board. If that's all we have for prompt number 1, now I do want to remind you, personal projects and well-being was prompt number 0. So we're on our third prompt, prompt number 2. And this is, discuss how intervention can be integrated into naturalistic settings and activities to enhance skill transfer and generalization. You could also provide examples discussed in this course and explore variations during different developmental periods. Once again, Sammy, you've been doing a great job leading off the conversation. If you want to start again, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Okay, so something I feel like we kind of talked about is just like, that continuum of naturalness and kind of how that applies to generalization. I guess, I don't know, it kind of feels like common knowledge at this point, but I know it's like not. So, like more natural settings, being with like parents or like even teachers for a more hybrid type of approach. Yeah, just working in those more natural contexts and activities like the daily routines. Something more specific that I thought was kind of interesting, like an option, I think it was mentioned in the book, I want to say, but they were saying for some like older students, like pushing into the class, because something I guess I hadn't even thought about is especially with like some of the older students, they might be embarrassed, to be like taken out or have someone like one-on-one working with them in the classroom. But one of these that were mentioned in the book is talking about like, you're not working one-on-one with the child in the classroom, but you might be like helping the teacher by working with like a whole group. And I thought that was interesting because you could still be helping with generalization because they're still there with their peers. They're in like the classroom setting, but like at the same time, you're still going to work with them, but like they're older, they might not want that one-on-one attention just because, I mean, we know how middle and high schools are. So, or even those upper elementary grades too. But even like with early education, I thought it was really interesting to learn about kind of those interventions, especially where like the SLP teaches the parent more so than the child. I had heard of it before, but this was the first time I feel like we really got like an in-depth look at it. Because before I was always like, oh yeah, of course I want to be in the schools. But now like the idea of like being in the home, like the child's most natural environment, like working with the parents so that they can carry it over just into daily life. I found that super interesting. It's something I definitely want to look into more. Something I guess I wanted to ask, because Colby, you said you work in the schools, right?
Yes.
So something I was kind of wondering with that is like, it's kind of obvious how like, working with parents and more of that early intervention thing, because you're working one-on-one with them, you're teaching them how they can work with their child, but like, kind of how do you work that in? I mean, if you see it at all, like work that into like a school setting, like working with those like natural like communication partners who might not be there present in the school day and like carrying that over, I guess, to home life as well as just like in the school. That's just something I was curious about.
So for me, I have worked with early steps. And so
Mhm.
I was in the house with the parent, and of course you're teaching them the strategies. When I transitioned to the education system and now as an SLPA, the therapy isn't so much with the parents.
Yeah.
It is more of like the natural setting in school. So them
Mhm.
working with their peers, them working with other teachers, them being able to communicate when they are walking through the lunch line, playing with each other on the playground, asking, or getting the attention of the teacher. So requesting. So it's more of like the natural setting in the classroom once they get to once they're school age.
Yeah.
Because even now in like our what we would consider toddlers, so those or pre-K, the 3 and 4 year olds, of course, mommies and daddies aren't there. So for some of the students who are nonverbal, we use pictures, we use AAC devices. So we may incorporate pictures of, family members or help them be able to request using like the device for
Yeah.
some, like if they were to ask mommy for something or ask daddy for something. But it's more in that aspect and not necessarily with the, me talking or teaching with the parent,
Yeah.
unless they make a request for something, like if there's a behavior at home or something that's happening at home and they're asking for some support in that manner.
Yeah, because this might be a better question kind of for like our final prompt if we make it there. But I was kind of just thinking about it because I don't remember if it was in the book or in like a video we watched. I saw a thing where it was like, I think it was in the book, but like just saying like need to find like better ways to like include parents, even in the school system because like I mean obviously like they're there for like the IEP process, probably like helping with goal setting.
Mhm.
We're seeing something with like how can we include them beyond just like the IEP like goal setting aspect of it and expand it further. I guess I just really don't know. So it was just something I was kind of thinking about, curious about, but that's all I have. So
I was thinking about two interventions which I rated as highly natural, and one of them was the Hanan program, and the other was the Jasper intervention, which Matt did the presentation on, so he knows more about it than I do. But all four of us rated those as being highly natural, and those are both programs that are really driven by parent education and
yeah,
parent training, and where the parent is kind of almost like the primary agent of change. And it makes sense because, the SLP may see the child for, a couple hours per week max, whereas the parent is with them all the time at the home environment. And I like how Colby pointed out, like, once the child enters school, that very much is their natural environment. They're there for almost, almost 40 hours a week. It's a lot of time at school, but still they're going home and interacting with their parents, and the parents can still be huge agents for change. I believe the Hanan and Jasper were both also for younger than school age, or can at least be started at younger than school age too. So that also makes it important that the parents are facilitators in the intervention. But I found that to be really interesting, in how the SLP could potentially affect more change in the child by educating the parents, as long as the parents are the ones with the most exposure to the child at that point. Matt, did you want to add anything to what I had to say about those interventions, especially since I think you wrote on the Jasper intervention?
Yeah, so just and I also like I do a lot of I also am an SLPA, and I do in-home as well, so it's through a different company. So I only have one client right now, but I do see them in-home only. And that's like really where generalization like occurs. And uh I guess like generalization might be thought of as like the final step in therapy, but really it uh probably should be incorporated throughout therapy, like at the very beginning. So as opposed to like, okay, now we generalize the skills, it should be kind of in the forefront of like whenever we start therapy, this is generalization needs to occur. So how can I make the therapy, how can I make the stimuli as similar to what this kid sees in home? He or she doesn't know give a mouse a cookie, or I find books that they're comfortable with, that they know, not just like there's the speech books that we only know that exist only in a speech therapy room. So those are kind of like out the door as far as generalization. Not that they don't have their use, but as far as generalization is concerned, probably less so. I found some stuff in the book, like Costello and Smith argued that generalization can only occur by carefully planning generalization training within the context of the intervention program. So pretty much saying that it's not just going to happen. It's not just going to happen on wishful thinking. It has to be a planned and thought out process. And they suggested that there's a lot of different ways, but they found the best way was, I'll read off some. They suggested that we should stop training with the client, or stop training when the client is responding with high accuracy to a limited set of stimuli. So if they've mastered the target, don't just stop training on that target. Okay, they've done well with what I've given them. Now we need to expand it. Now we need to take it into different areas. They've done well with the 6 books I've shown them. Let's bring it to a different place. But don't just stop at materials. Try different environments. Environments need to change too. It can't just be the speech room. Like Kobe, you teach in a school, the classroom, the cafeteria, the hallway, all that is where generalization occurs. Modifying, yeah, we talked about modifying the environment, using materials that are similar to the child's environment. Throwing in like random comments and stuff that kind of like not throw them off, but just to kind of reenact what a real life communication environment looks like. If you're just drilling and then that's the end of the session, that's not really what communication looks like. Drill a couple cards, ask a question, make a comment, and then go back to the drill. If it just stays within the therapy activity, its generalization isn't going to occur as fluidly. Also encouraging the child to take advantage of what Sammy, you touched on this, their peers. So much can be learned from their peers, and having them be the teacher is like a dream come true for most kids. Have them teach you, then they can self-monitor. So if they can self-monitor, then they might be extrinsically motivated to like learn this stuff and want to know it. And that's another big step in generalization. So just taking those. So, but I think the most important thing is just to build generalization consistently throughout therapy, and it to not to be an afterthought, to be in the forefront. So how is this applying to the kids' environment? And I know there's a lot to be said about parent training. I know that's coming later, so I'll just stop there.
Can you guys think of any situations where naturalistic language intervention might face challenges and how you would face those challenges?
Sorry, I just spoke, but if Sammy or Kobe, you want like a challenge I face when I'm like in home is that the TV is on and I'm trying to do speech therapy, and the parents, they want to, the kid wants the TV on. I'm trying to do speech therapy, but the TV is always on. So should I?
It's very natural.
Should I? This is natural. This is the way maybe I should turn, but I'm not getting anything done. So at what point is natural working against me? So
yeah,
that's just one example.
What a great point. I love that. Anyone else have any comments on challenges of naturalistic therapy?
I'll just jump in really quickly. So, like you talked about in home, I'll talk about in the classroom. So they want us to one of the ways that they want us to do therapy now is to push it into the classrooms. But of course, you go into a pre-K classroom that has 7 kids and you're supposed to be working one-on-one with one, and you have the other kids that want to participate. You have the video playing in the background. You have the teacher teaching. And like the transition, it's hard to transition a 3 or 4-year-old out of the classroom because they want to run, they want to jump, they want to go to the playground. Anything that they see on the way to the speech room, they want to participate in that. So those are just some of the things that I experienced that would be natural because the classroom would be their natural setting, but it is difficult to do therapy with all of the action going on.
Yeah. I have another prompt that I wrote, and I asked you guys to discuss how language intervention strategies might need to be adapted for different developmental stages. Now, we've been focusing most of our conversation so far on, I would say, birth to 3 and then also child, but not so much adolescent. So thinking about adolescence and how would natural therapies be challenging for adolescents? What comes to me, what if the primary target is syntax, grammar, and development of that, and you're using like an expository method to teach those, you're using explicit instruction? How could that be affected by a more natural environment where the communication isn't so natural? Any of you have anything to say about that? Because to me, I can see that it would be challenging if you're basically doing like a grammar lesson for an adolescent who struggles with syntax. How could that be made more natural, or how could it facilitate more naturalization into their normal communication environment if you're using mostly explicit teaching strategies?
I mean, I think kind of with that, that's also just almost kind of what the classroom might be looking like, though, at that point, kind of more of those explicit, decontextualized, almost like ideas of like writing, like reading, like writing about what you're reading, different things like that. But like when you're saying that, I'm also just kind of thinking about like different difficulties, kind of. I feel like it'd be kind of difficult, like when you get to those older levels, though, too, because like a teacher might want you to like work on those things too, but like if you're doing like a push-in or like something else like that, at like what point is it almost like are they expecting you to be more of like a tutor rather than like, staying in your realm of like SLP?
And I think about how much intervention changes, especially as specified in our textbook, from child to adolescent. I think when you're a child, you might have these late talkers or people with a DLD, who have some syntax issues, grammar issues, and the hope is kind of always that it will resolve, they'll catch up, they'll learn to read on grade level, and then they'll become a normal adult, and that a normal adult will say, oh, you wouldn't believe this, but I was a late talker. I didn't talk till I was in the first grade, that kind of thing. But I think when we get into these people who continue to need interventions into adolescence, up to the age of 21 when services end, a lot of times these issues are permanent. So we're working on supporting the adolescent or the, individual who needs support, but we're working not so much on fixing the strategies, but more on compensatory strategies, which I found to be something I want to discuss in this group as well, because talking about child language intervention, so often it seems like we're trying to get that child to catch up, and get in line with their peers and become successful in academia. But at the adolescent level, when these people are still seeking these services and have the perceived language deficits, they have the lower test scores, they're looking at finding compensatory strategies and looking for a way to essentially live with language deficits. Any comments on that?
Yeah, Joe, I like to quote the book just because this is gonna be like my topic of interest anyway. So I'm so glad you brought it up. It says intervention can attempt to eliminate or cure a disorder, modify or ameliorate the disorder, or change the way the client responds to the disorder by providing compensatory strategies. So
Wow.
I feel like
you hit the nail on the
time.
That's exactly.
Yeah. So by the time they're that age, they're kind of only left with the compensatory strategies, and that can be not only like, I don't want to sound insensitive by saying it's a hard pill to swallow, because there's nothing wrong with compensatory strategies, but it can be a little jarring for a family that has been seeking to cure a disorder or what have you their whole lives, and now the child is reaching 18, 19 years old. So
Yeah.
yeah. So it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I discussed during residency week, Colby wasn't there. So Colby doesn't know that I was a really, really late reader. Like, I learned to read in the 4th grade, but somehow I caught up. It's a miracle. I don't think anyone ever thought I would. And now I'm here. But yeah, I'm an example of one of those really, really late readers. And it was so long ago, no one really remembers exactly what happened. I've talked about it with my mom, and I know that she was a school teacher and she gave me some intensive reading lessons one summer, but she underplays it. When I talk about it with her, she's kind of like, well, yeah, I gave you some additional help, but she feels I cut up on my own. I feel that she helped me catch up. No one's really certain how I ended up successful. So it's very gray too. I can't take my little case study and say, oh, I could help children with, literacy issues by doing blah, 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 because we don't really know what happened. Somehow my brain caught up or my behavior caught up. So that's an interesting topic too.
But your ability to kind of like relate is like unmatched in that regard.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, something I'm kind of also thinking about is, have you guys ever seen like the TikTok of that one guy who's trying to teach himself how to read as an adult?
Yeah, I think so. I think
I
Yeah,
haven't.
so he, I don't
Is he
know if
like a
like,
viral guy?
yeah, I
I
think
feel like I
so.
have seen it. Yeah.
But he kind of like sits in his car and like teaches himself to read. He had like a goal of like reading 100 books this year
I've
because
seen it.
he's teaching
Yeah.
himself to
Mhm.
read. Yeah. And like that kind of reminded me of the generalization, because in one of his videos I watched, he was talking about how like he had just gotten done at like, I don't remember if it was like a doctor's appointment or like DMV, something like that. But he was like, they were like trying to get him to hurry up, and he was like, I can't read the form, like I need extra time or I need extra help with that. So kind of even just when we're thinking about like generalization for those older groups and like those sentences, even like incorporating into those like more adult like forms or different things that they might need to fill out or encounter, kind of like just even to be independent, more so independent. Some people might not be as independent when they get older, but just increasing independence where you can for like some of those skills needed for like just adulthood could be like an interesting way to like generalize it for like more of those things like syntax or other things. I don't know, it just kind of reminded me of that.
Very nice. Well, We've talked through our first 3 prompts successfully, and I think we've had some great discussions. I think we just have a couple minutes left. Our last prompt was supposed to be extra. It's on parent and caretaker training, which we actually did touch on, which I expected. You know, everything's interconnected. I knew we'd come around to that in one way or another. But I have a prompt for you. Share personal experiences or insights in how to involve parents and caregivers has positively impacted language therapy outcomes. Also, you might consider cultural differences and how they influence effectiveness of and parent and caregiver training in language intervention. Especially, you might think about cultural differences we have here in the United States among populations for children who have language intervention, and how those might have an effect on your intervention methods or how you would approach intervention.
Yeah, I guess I'm not coming from like the SLPA side of things, but like working with my students learning like English as a second language. I think we have this one student right now, they're from a refugee from Yemen, and they're just like not, I guess the teacher says catching on as much as their younger siblings are. And I don't think they collaborated with the parents at all, like prior to this, because they're like, all we know is that they're a refugee from Yemen. So we don't know if there's like, possible like trauma or like previous like special ed services or different things like that. So after like the holiday break and like coming into the new year, they said they might try and do more of like an actual parent interview to like get that information and see if something like that might be impacting their ability to like learn these new language skills that they just right now aren't really connecting with, or possibly even seeing if they need to connect with like other special ed services. So I mean, it's not the like SLP side of things, but I just thought it was kind of reminded me of it.
I
Interesting.
love that, Sammy. I do ESL too for adults, and I love ESL. And I'm especially, having worked with so many ESL learners, I love the topic of, you know, language differences versus language disorders, and how commonly language
Yeah.
disorders or language differences are mistaken by classroom teachers for language disorders.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you. My mother was a high school, not high school, but school district administrator for all of her career. And she talked many times about the inappropriate referrals by school teachers for Spanish language speakers to speech language services when they just had a Spanish accent.
Yep.
That's all they had. And a little slower catching up on grammar, but doesn't mean they had a language disorder. They're just an English language learner. And they don't often need SLP services. They need some additional support with language learning, but it's not like someone who's going to need a speech language pathologist. They're essentially a normal language learner who's just catching up, you know?
Yeah, I was talking to one of the teachers I work under, and when I told her like this was the grad program I was in, she was like, "Oh yeah, like a lot of our students, like younger students, work with the SLP." And I'm like, "What? Like, what do you mean?" So apparently, these like ESL tutoring services that like I'm working through right now, they only cover it like K through 12. So she told me that like anyone who's like before, like in their pre-K program, she was like, "Well, we don't have the funding to send them to like an ESL teacher or tutor, so we just like." Have them go like see an SLP. And like I was talking like Dr. J, and even she was like, that's extremely like unethical. Like that's
Inappropriate.
something that can
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
done at all. And I was just so surprised that she was like, oh yeah, that's just what we do. And I'm like, they're like letting this happen. I
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it, but
I love dialect and I love teaching dialect, but it's an elective. It's not a disorder. You know, you're not treating a disorder when you do that. You're treating someone who wants to maybe I like to treat people who want to be perceived as American, but that is their choice. Usually they're actors. I live in Los Angeles. You know, that's their choice. That's their choice. They don't have a disorder. They don't have disordered speech. We're not working on disorders. So I love that. I was wondering, Colby, do you have any insights with your school background on ESL? I see you nodding your head a lot.
Um, yes, with ESL, I do see that a lot. The difference between the language. Um, I have a lot of students who are under the speech and language umbrella who are learning English as a second language, and the dialect turns into a speech disorder. Um, I always call it the conjugating of English.
Mhm.
Our vocabulary, their vocabulary turns into a language disorder. And it's really sad because they're not getting the service that they need. They're not getting that ESL person, or ESOL was what we call them in our district, the ESOL person who will come in, pair, and just help them through their academics. And that is just really English to Spanish vocabulary. And so when you have someone like me, who I am not dual language, and so I have a hard time, I have a hard time with that back and forth when there is a child who is learning English for a second language. I can tell you what it is in English, and I can ask for help for it in Spanish, but it is challenging. And I think just the lack of knowledge between the two, they get
Yes.
placed in programs that they don't belong in.
I think so too. Matt, any comments on that? I realize we kind of switched topics, but I think that's great.
No, that's the point. I love it. We
Mhm.
kind of we touched on the first topic a lot anyway, so I agree. Even like you would think it's a crazy question, but when I guess I can talk about both of these at the same time. So when I am parent training, that I get asked the question like, oh, if I'm teaching speaking Spanish and English at home, are they gonna like not learn either? And you would think that's like ancient history by now,
Mhm.
but
Nope.
you have to consider that we are in the field and we live and breathe this. So we just kind of have to just take everyone as the questions as they come and answer them as they come, and just be an advocate for those kind of things. I feel like that's be the change you want to see, and I think that's important to this field. And I think that there's the thing about, I feel like speech in general is that there's so much gray area of like, even when diagnosing, like there's so much like so many different ways that this could go. So it's a lot of responsibility. So it takes a lot of careful thought. But even like when you see a language difference and you diagnose it as a disorder, I feel like that needs to be obviously learned early and often, but also just preached in a way that's like, okay, let's make sure that these children are getting help, but they don't need to see a speech therapist. So things just need to be just kind of brought up throughout the field all the time. So it's just important. But Sammy, Kobe, Joe, you all did articulated perfectly. So
Well, thank you so much, you guys. We're near the end of our assignment here. We've talked about personal projects. We talked about our favorite topics in language intervention. We've talked about parent training. We've talked about naturalization, and we even talked about ESL and particular challenges that go up with ESL students. That wasn't on our schedule, but we managed to add an extra topic in there. And I really found what y'all had to say to be quite interesting and informative. I just wanted to ask if any of you had any final comments or things you'd like to say before we sign off.
I love the class. It was a great class, and this was a great conversation. So
Definitely a great conversation. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all. Everything this semester, honestly.
thank you.
Yes, yes. I thought it was a great class too. I learned a lot, and it was really nice to cap this off tonight by having this discussion with you all. We've been working together on projects all semester, but this was kind of our first time all seeing each other in video, and it was a lot of fun. So that said, I think we'll call it a night. You all have a great rest of your semester. If you're still working on aphasia stuff, I'm done. Hate to brag. All right. You all have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.